I wanted to talk to you about today is not just using interesting texture yarn, but also touching on making your own hand spun yarn or yarn with more interesting textures. So I don't know, the first thing I guess I wanted to do was show you some examples of different things that I have made with different techniques using hand spun or more kind of unique types of yarn. I just personally think that this is a really exciting topic because I feel like so many people, we get into knitting or crocheting. I feel like I'm mainly talking to a knitting audience here, where, and I don't mean to sound like this isn't important or isn't good, because it totally is, but where everything can become so scientific of like, I have to have this gauge swatch and it has to be exactly right, and I have to have the drape exactly correct and trying to match the exact yarn. And I mean, while that is important, and I mean, if you're making a sweater, like, you definitely want your sweater to fit you the way that you want it to, be most flattering and wearable. So I definitely feel like there's very much a time and a place for that. I think there's also a time and a place for being a little bit more creative, using something that maybe isn't so typical, and then ending up with something really unique and one of a kind that is just much more fun and textural than, something. I mean, if you're going to knit something and make it so perfect that it looks like you could have bought it at the store, like, you might as well have bought it at the store. So let me show you some of my favorite examples. I'm going to sort of walk through some different tips for using more unusual yarns, and then I will show you a little bit of a demo on a drop spindle if you had any inklings on wanting to know more about making your own. Okay, this one is a cowl that I really like. It is a pattern, I believe by Alicia Plummer. So I like all of her things. They're very classic knits. And you can see that this is I started out with my most typical looking one. This cowl is 100% hand spun yarn. And it's got a sticker on it. It's a piece of tape on it. Ignore the tape. This cowl is 100% hand spun yarn, but you can see that the drape, wearability, and then the pattern, I'm hoping you can see, and I did knit this a long time ago, and I am definitely not the world's best lace knitter, so I'm sure there's mistakes in here, but it definitely looks good, especially for me, and is something I would consider very wearable. This is all totally hand spun yarn. It was a double ply. I'm going to try to zoom in where you can see it. It's two different types of 2-ply hand spun. So sorry if my face is so close. So both sections are 2-ply hand spun that are knit in a lace pattern, which I feel like a lot of people don't think of doing lace work with hand spun. And this would be both of them were a bulky weight yarn. So this is a more classic traditional pattern, but when I was looking for the pattern, it was for the yardage that I had for my hand spun yarn, the two different types together, as well as it was bulky weight. In my opinion, if you're going to be using hand spun yarn, unless you were just a super thin spinner or the person you got the yarn from was a super fine spinner, you're usually going to be looking at patterns that either are bulky or chunky in weight. Like if you're on Ravelry and you're searching, you'd want to search in the worsted to chunky section, and then just try to match up the appropriate yardage. So you really don't have to get more scientific than that if you're looking for patterns on Ravelry for your more unique yarns. So like I said, I wanted to start out with showing this one as a more classic example of using hand spun yarn in a way that came out very wearable, and like you might not necessarily know that this was hand spun. So like I said, you can see the colors are very blocked. You can definitely see the difference between the ribbing and the lace. So this came out in a very typical knitwear sort of way, not too wacky. So that's example number one. See, this example is, I wanted to talk about using a pattern, and you can see it's a shawl, like a small shawl. It's really pretty though. And I do not remember this, I think was like a free pattern on Ravelry. I made this years ago at the beach. I needed a vacation, needed a vacation project. But what I wanted to show on this is two excuse me, totally different types of yarn. The gray part is a, I believe it was actually kind of a wool and bamboo blend. I picked it up, like I said, at the beach. So, you know, it was summertime, so they had a lot of lightweight stuff. So this was a wool and bamboo blend, a just regular bulky weight yarn. And then this section here obviously was like I would classify it as like a bulky, chunky hand spun, and it was single ply and kind of thick and thin in texture. So what makes these, in my opinion, work so well together, even though you can definitely see that the border, you know, is chunkier, like if you fold it, you can see the chunky difference there versus this part. There are also thin parts. You can see how in this hand spun, this was a single ply, thick and thin hand spun yarn. So you can see the thicker sections and the thinner sections. The thinner sections are the same size and same structure as this bulky weight yarn. So this is a Millspun wool and bamboo blend of a bulky weight single ply. So this is a single ply and this is a single ply. This is bulky. This has sections that are bulky with kind of pops of chunky in there for more of a pattern. But you can see that there is definitely a consistency between the two. So these are two totally different yarn options, but they have enough similarities that, in my opinion, they play well together. And so this, once again, this is showing a example of, I'm trying to get enough light behind it where you can see it, chunky, bulky yarn, but done in a lace pattern. So, I mean, it was okay. This next one is a pattern that is free on my website, and it is a kind of a loose knit adjustable. Here, I haven't worn this in forever. It's old. It's got kind of a point. Here you go. It's got like a point and then adjustable, like an I-cord where you can kind of cinch it, with the idea being that I have worn this over like a strapless dress or a spaghetti strap dress, you know, it's kind of a shoulder drape, and you can put the point either in the front or you can put the point in the back. You could, and it drapes down in a V. But what I wanted to show on this was, this is one of my favorite things to do with kind of artsy, bulky, chunky yarn. You can see this is a slightly thick and thin 2-ply yarn, and it's a colorful strand plied with a natural brown wool. And it's a drop stitch. I love using drop stitch. So you can see you've got these longer drop stitch sections with then shorter sections in the middle of garter stitch. So it's garter stitch, and then drop stitch, and then garter stitch, and then drop stitch. And that is the main part of this pattern. And what I like so much about drop stitches with, and garter stitch as well, but it gives you this loose, like really you can pull it apart kind of. I mean, look how big that can get in that section if you want it to be, you know, and that's why this works well, because you can pull it down over your shoulders. But it gives you this great stretchy, almost like fisherman's net look, and it really shows off the texture of the yarn, and it also gives you a lot of like bang for your buck as far as yardage, because if you have like maybe just 2 or 3 skeins of hand spun yarn that you made or were gifted or purchased, you know, you're trying to get the most length out of that you can. So I love to keep this one as an example of look how stretchy it is, of how much you can really stretch and use with a drop stitch. But I really think that a looser knit approach is definitely what shows off textured or unusual yarns the best. This one was, I don't know if any of you remember Fiber Share. I actually did not spin this yarn. Fiber Share was, I think COVID kind of killed it, where you could sign up basically to be pen pals in the mail with somebody. And it was for fiber, but this particular person sent me a bunch of hand spun yarn, and it was big and chunky and beehivey and chunkier than I usually spin myself. So I definitely took it was beautiful, as like a challenge to see what all I could do with it. So it was all these kind of smaller sections of hand spun yarn. So I came up with this pattern. It's not even really a pattern, but it's that same pattern I was talking about. I think this was maybe knit collage, which I have feelings about, but this was definitely hand spun. But you can see it's the same idea of these drop stitch sections, garter stitch, drop stitch, garter stitch. And I believe I've gotten this pattern up on my website. I mean, it's just pretty much repeating, and then it has pom-poms, and it's just a big, giant, snuggly scarf. So that's definitely, this is probably the biggest yarn I have personally worked with myself. And it's definitely would be considered a chunky pattern. Anything with these beehives in it would be chunky yarn. Even though, yeah, I mean, even the smallest sections on this would be chunky yarn. I used really big needles, probably the biggest needles in my set I could get to go on my needles, on my wires. And then this is what it ended up with. But I think anything, once again, if you're using big yarn, try to leave some breathing room in whatever it is you're knitting. I really recommend garter stitch or drop stitch for this really big yarn, because if you try to make it be too tight and too compact, it's just going to end up being like a rug. Like anything this thick, if you try to make it be too just like stockinette or something, it's going to end up being really stiff just from, you know, trying to get that much volume all smashed down into a small area. So definitely leave some breathing room with the bigger, chunkier knits. Okay, last but not least, these are actually Millspun yarns, and they are both by Galler Yarns, which is our favorite and one that we carry on my website. This is actually one that's part of a, depending on when you see this, a free knit kit situation we have online, but that, you know, which while supplies last. So if you're seeing this way in the future, you may just have to get the pattern and then purchase the yarn. Like I said, this is Galler Asana. And it is, we love this yarn, and I will not bore you with all the details because you can find out more on my website. But basically, myself and the staff here at Crafty Housewife Yarns fell in love with this particular type of yarn because it had the structure and like hand feel of hand spun yarn, but it was mill spun. So we just thought that was amazing because you can see how even though all of this is the same yarn but in different colors, you could easily, if you had a skein of hand spun that you had spun that was bulky weight 2-ply, you could very easily incorporate it into a pattern with this particular yarn and it would be like seamless. So this is a wool alpaca blend. And this pattern, it's called the Asana Sampler Shawl. I really wanted it to be like an introduction to newer knitters of kind of different stitches. So, you know, we've got some eyelets, we've got garter stitch, we've got stockinette stitch, and it's a repeating pattern of pretty much stockinette, garter stitch, eyelets throughout this whole shawl. And then, of course, because it's a shawl, it has increases involved in it. So the idea with this was that if you wouldn't want to be like, I've never knit before in my life, but if you had just been doing like, I just started knitting and I'm just doing scarves, like my idea was that this pattern would be a kind of like the Victorian samplers were, where you learned the different stitches as you went. That's what I was going for with this, that by the time you were done with this pattern, you would have, as an intermediate newer knitter, learned or become more comfortable with the different sections, while also learning to not be scared of, you can see the texture, where some is definitely thicker and thinner, and this is all just knit on the same needles of bulky knit cables. So I did not change needles anywhere in here, but you can definitely see the, you know, the texture in that. So I was really hoping that this pattern would be a great jumping off point for people that were learning to knit. And if you never develop that like fear of the unusual with yarn, then it's never a problem. So I thought that was also, you know, me kind of pushing people off the cliff there. This one is my most recent pattern. It is also a Galler yarn, but it is a different yarn. This one is called Wow. They called it Wow. It's for worsted 1-ply woolen one-ply worsted. That was it. But it's WOW, W-O-W, and it's Galler. And it is my dream yarn, basically. It's a single ply. So even though this one is Millspun, like I said, it's Galler yarns. It is the same texture and fuzzy hand feel and single ply yarn that I love to spin single ply yarn. So this is something that, even though it is Millspun, this easily could be hand spun. And you can see how it's the same you know, you can definitely, with this type of yarn, do lots of different patterns. I am not a super fancy knitter, I must admit, because I'm busy running a business, so I haven't gotten around to doing a lot of the fancier lace work that I know a lot of my friends have. This yarn you could very easily do as fancy of lace work as you wanted to do, and you can see the drape is lovely. There's the drape. And it's got a great stretch. But like I said, this easily could be hand spun. So this pattern could be used for a worsted style single ply. And single ply means that there's just one piece of yarn, basically. So if we took two of these strands and twisted them together, that would be double ply. And that's what I'm talking about. Whereas this one is a double ply. Let me find a piece where you could see maybe. You can see how each strand is kind of two things twisted together. Whereas this one, it is just one single strand. So real quick, before I do my demo on spinning, this is and I have no affiliation with Knit Picks. This particular brand is Knit Picks, and you can see this one's missing from my current knitting project. But I love this idea with the adjustable wires and the different head sizes, because then that way, if you are knitting like the scarf, the shawl I showed you, where you maybe from like one section and then you have a bulkier hand spun back to the thinner, you could easily just untwist your wires and switch out the heads. So I really find that this is incredibly useful for that type of work. And it goes the biggest one in this set is an 11, even though I know you can special order larger needles. For the bulkier weight yarns, I usually use, I think, between like an 8 and an 11. So definitely up here more for my bulkier weight yarns, which would accommodate the more unusual textures. So I'm going to do a little shout out on that first.